What if I told you the most powerful brands in the world aren't Louis Vuitton, Chanel, or Rolls-Royce? The strongest brands aren't even products. They're families, names, and legacies that have lasted for centuries. And here's the secret. Old money never shouts its wealth. It brands it. Today, we're diving into the invisible strategies that have allowed dynasties to remain untouchable for generations. If you've ever wondered how families like the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, or the Rothschilds managed to turn a surname into a symbol of quiet power, you're about to find out. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because here we uncover the hidden world of wealth, power, and luxury that most people never get to see. When you think of branding today, you might think of logos, slogans, and advertising campaigns. But old money plays a completely different game. For them, branding isn't about visibility, it's about perception. Their logos aren't printed on handbags. They're etched into the gates of estates, carved into stone libraries, or whispered through generations of private clubs. The family name itself becomes the brand, carefully guarded, polished, and quietly reinforced through tradition. Unlike new money, which often seeks recognition, think of tech billionaires buying sports teams or celebrities launching fashion lines, old money practices subtractive branding. They take away the noise, the flash, the obvious displays, until what's left is something timeless, subtle, and enduring. One of the first unspoken rules of old money branding is this: never chase the trend, outlive it. For example, when new money flaunts the latest fashion labels, old money leans on custom tailoring, classic cuts, and garments that could be worn today or 50 years ago without looking outdated. Their style isn't designed to impress strangers. It's designed to communicate continuity. In business, the same principle applies. Where new money might jump on volatile industries to make a quick fortune, old money invests in assets that last: land, art, infrastructure, and trusts. These aren't just financial decisions, they're brand decisions. A family's brand becomes synonymous with stability and permanence. This explains why so many old money families avoid attaching their names to fleeting consumer ventures. You'll rarely see an Astor or a Carnegie trying to sell sneakers or soda. Their names are tied to hospitals, libraries, and universities, institutions that scream permanence rather than trendiness. Another unspoken rule: the less you say, the louder your brand speaks. Old money branding thrives on understatement. For example, when you walk into a stately home, you won't see logos splashed across the walls. Instead, you'll find heirlooms, paintings, or subtle monograms woven into fabrics. These symbols don't scream for attention, they whisper exclusivity. Even their speech patterns play a role. Old money avoids boasting. Instead of saying, "We own this company," they'll casually remark, "We've been involved with that industry for some time." The vagueness isn't accidental, it's branding. It creates mystery, exclusivity, and an aura of importance without ever needing to explain. Brands are only as strong as what they're associated with. And old money knows this better than anyone. They carefully control their circles. You won't find them at just any event or vacationing at overcrowded tourist destinations. Instead, they're seen at invitation-only galas, secluded estates, or sailing regattas known only to a select few. These environments become part of the brand. Just as Hermes cultivates exclusivity by limiting access to its products, old money cultivates its brand by limiting access to itself. Their presence, or even their absence, creates desire. If you want to be associated with old money, you must first prove you belong, and that exclusivity strengthens their brand far more than publicity ever could. Here's one of the greatest secrets. Old money doesn't market through advertising. They market through philanthropy. Why? Because giving isn't just charity, it's branding with permanence. When you see a Rockefeller University, a Carnegie Hall, or a Getty Museum, you're not just looking at philanthropy. You're looking at a brand that has been immortalized through stone and scholarship. The brilliance lies in the fact that this branding doesn't look like branding at all. It looks like generosity, service, and legacy. Yet it keeps the family name alive for centuries, attached not to material goods but to education, culture, and social progress. That's the ultimate form of subtle branding, It makes the name timeless while appearing selfless. For old money, reputation is worth more than any crest or emblem. It's the invisible shield that protects their name across centuries. This is why discretion is paramount. Old money knows that scandal doesn't just damage individuals, it tarnishes the entire family brand. That's why their lives are often cloaked in privacy. You'll rarely see them posting their vacations on social media or parading wealth online. Silence and restraint protect the family's reputation, and that reputation is the true brand equity. Contrast this with new money figures who thrive on exposure. The Kardashians, for example, have monetized constant visibility. But old money doesn't need visibility. In fact, their absence from the spotlight is the strategy. Their reputation is carried not by tabloids, but by legacy institutions, whispers in private clubs, and generations of influence. Another unspoken rule: a name is not just a label, it's a brand in itself. Think about it. When you hear Rockefeller, Rothschild, or Vanderbilt, you don't think of a single person. You think of an entire legacy. These names are cultivated carefully, with no reckless associations. Old money families avoid attaching their names to frivolous or unstable projects. Instead, they link their surnames to institutions of culture, education, or finance. Every time that name appears on a university wing, a hospital, or a foundation, it reinforces the brand's values: permanence, stability, and contribution to society. And when marriages occur, names become even more powerful. Double-barreled surnames like Astor Belmont or Spencer Churchill signal the merging of dynasties, almost like two global brands forming a merger. It's a deliberate branding move dressed up as tradition. While new money relies on slogans and flashy logos, old money communicates through symbols and heritage markers. These might be family crests, coats of arms, or even architectural details that quietly announce lineage. For example, ivy climbing the walls of an ancestral estate is not just a plant, it's a signal of time, endurance, and continuity. Another example is color. Old money often favors muted palettes: navy, burgundy, cream, and hunter green. These colors project stability and timelessness. Compare that with flashy golds, neon accents, or oversized logos often flaunted by the newly rich. The choice of color alone is branding: quiet, dignified, and deliberate. Even jewelry and accessories follow this principle. A simple pearl necklace or signet ring carries more weight in old money circles than a diamond-encrusted chain. Why? Because the subtlety itself is the brand. Old money understands a paradox. To remain powerful, a brand must be visible, but not too visible. Too much visibility cheapens exclusivity. Too little, and the brand risks fading into obscurity. So how do they strike the balance? Through controlled exposure. For instance, you may never see the private lives of the Rothschilds splashed across tabloids, but you will see their influence in financial circles, charitable foundations, and cultural institutions. They are visible where it matters, invisible where it doesn't. Finally, old money branding is carried in how they speak, write, and even interact socially. Words are chosen carefully. Boasting is avoided. Instead, subtle references are used to imply connections and influence without ever directly stating them. For example, instead of announcing "our family owns 3 estates in Europe," they might say, "We spend summers abroad in the same place we've been for generations." The effect is the same, but the branding is entirely different. One feels crass, the other feels established. If there's one family that mastered old money branding in America, it's the Rockefellers. John D. Rockefeller built an oil empire, but oil itself wasn't the brand. In fact, his fortune was controversial. Standard Oil was accused of monopolistic practices, and his name at one point carried as much criticism as admiration. So how did the Rockefellers transform their brand from ruthless industrialists into pillars of American society? Through philanthropic branding. The Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefeller University, and Rockefeller Center weren't random acts of generosity, they were branding decisions. By attaching the family name to science, education, medicine, and culture, the Rockefellers redefined their legacy. The name became less about oil and more about progress, permanence, and public service. Even today, when you hear Rockefeller, you don't think of barrels of crude oil. You think of Rockefeller Plaza at Christmas or world-class research institutions. That's branding at its most masterful. Andrew Carnegie followed a similar path. Known as one of the wealthiest men of the Gilded Age, Carnegie understood that wealth without purpose was fragile. His solution? Libraries. Across the United States, Carnegie funded over 2,500 public libraries, most of which still stand today. These weren't just gifts to the public, they were monuments to his name, quietly reinforcing the Carnegie brand as one of knowledge, accessibility, and learning. Long before American dynasties, European aristocrats had already perfected old money branding. Think of families like the Medicis in Italy or the Spencers in Britain. Their estates, coats of arms, and family chapels were more than just displays of wealth. They were deliberate branding exercises. The Medicis, for instance, weren't just bankers. They branded themselves as patrons of the Renaissance, financing artists like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. This tied their family name forever to art, culture, and innovation. In Britain, the Spencer family cultivated an image of duty, honor, and service to the crown. Centuries later, that branding allowed Diana Spencer, Princess Diana, to embody grace and compassion, qualities the family had been carefully associated with for generations. Aristocratic branding was never about business ventures. It was about aligning the family name with timeless values like art, tradition, and loyalty. The Vanderbilts offer another fascinating case. Cornelius Vanderbilt, known as the Commodore, made his fortune in shipping and railroads. At first, the Vanderbilt name was synonymous with brash ambition, but his descendants transformed that raw fortune into social capital. They built mansions like the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island, not just as homes, but as architectural branding statements. These estates communicated permanence, stability, and refinement. Over time, the Vanderbilt name became less about aggressive business and more about aristocratic-style living. However, the Vanderbilts also illustrate a warning. Without discipline, a brand can fade. Later generations became known more for excess than restraint, and the family's fortunes scattered. The lesson? Branding, like old money, requires consistency, or else the legacy risks dilution. Even today, we see echoes of old money branding strategies among ultra-wealthy families and institutions. Take the Gettys. Paul Getty was one of the richest men in history, but his name is remembered not for oil, but for the Getty Museum and Getty Center in Los Angeles. The brand shifted from petroleum wealth to cultural stewardship. Or consider the Rothschilds, whose brand is synonymous with global finance and philanthropy. You won't see them flashing wealth on Instagram, but their carefully curated foundations and low-profile influence keep the Rothschild name alive as one of power and discretion. Rule 1. Silence is louder than noise. In the world of old money, silence itself is a form of branding. You won't see lengthy press releases or personal Instagram lives detailing every move. Instead, they let others do the talking. Gossip columns, society pages, and whispered conversations in private clubs become the marketing department. This silence makes their presence feel larger. People speculate, they wonder, they fill in the blanks, and the mystery becomes part of the brand. In fact, the less an old money family explains itself, the more people assume there's something worth knowing. Rule 2. Consistency builds trust. Old money knows that true branding is never erratic. The rules, behaviors, and symbols remain constant across generations. If a family is known for philanthropy, every generation contributes in some form. If they're known for discretion, no descendant dares to overshare. If they're associated with understated style, you won't see them suddenly chasing loud trends. This consistency builds a reputation so reliable that the brand becomes automatic. When you hear the name, you already know what to expect, even if you've never met a single family member. That's branding at its highest level, when expectation alone does the work. Rule 3. Symbolism over slogans. Unlike corporations, old money families don't rely on catchy phrases or taglines. Their branding is rooted in symbolism. An estate with ivy-covered walls communicates more permanence than any ad campaign. A Latin motto etched in stone outlasts any modern hashtag. A family crest passed through generations tells a story that no marketing budget could replicate. Whereas new money buys billboards, old money invests in heritage markers, symbols designed to last centuries, not seasons. Rule 4. Privacy is the ultimate luxury. The richest form of branding is invisibility. When you can live without needing to explain yourself, when your influence speaks louder than your visibility, you've reached the pinnacle of old money branding. Privacy isn't just a lifestyle choice. It's a calculated branding move. It separates them from the masses, reinforces exclusivity, and ensures that access itself is a privilege. When the public sees only fragments, those fragments become legendary. Rule 5. Legacy beats spotlight. Perhaps the most crucial unspoken rule: build a brand for the next century, not for this one. Old money knows that personal fame fades, but institutional legacy endures. That's why their names are attached to libraries, museums, scholarships, and charitable foundations. Each one is a branding pillar that guarantees the family's reputation will outlive the individual. This is why you don't see old money trying to go viral. Their brand doesn't need to burn bright for a moment. It needs to endure for generations. All of these rules are held together by one thing: discipline. Old money doesn't leave branding up to chance. It's enforced across generations. Children are raised with etiquette, traditions, and expectations that shape not just their behavior, but the family image. They are taught how to speak, how to dress, how to give, and, most importantly, how to protect the family name. One reckless scandal could unravel centuries of careful branding. That's why old money takes reputation management as seriously as financial management. While influencers and entrepreneurs chase viral fame, old money invests in permanence. Their brand doesn't need billboards or hashtags. It's already carved into history, whispered in exclusive circles, and etched into institutions that will stand long after the spotlight has moved on. And that's the final rule. When your brand can outlive you, when it can remain strong without ever needing your voice, you've achieved the highest form of branding.